Early morning, Sister, 27th of October 937. The Scots are on the sea, Utad told Finan. They were back at the lodging house that Aldhelm had shown them to. In the event of a siege, it should hold, he reasoned. Better her here, Benedetta, than Bibbenberg. They call themselves Alba, Finan mused. Idly, the tension was building in all of them. Talking about things that were irrelevant meant their mind would not fill of the horror that was to come. It was vital that, if you were going to war, that the mind did not think about it, or you never would, and Finan's seemingly idle words were careful and measured. Alfred called them Scots. My father called them Scots. They are from Irian, he told Utad. Scotty, thieves, raiders. He had not looked away from his sword, not made eye contact. Finan never spoke out to Utad, never lied to him, and Utad had never in return. But in this was Osrith. Sister he never knew he had. Sister he had jaded even when he had found out. Finan loved her with his very soul, and yet he was still beside him, bonded, as they had been since the slave ship. Well, that explains everything, Utad told him. And she's with them then? When Finan said nothing, merely dropped the sheepskin fleece with which he was polishing his blade, he added, my sister. He watched Finan inspect his blade, as the cool, autumn sunlight reflected from its surface. They call themselves Alba. And what do you call them? There was not the guile Finan expected in his friend's face. The enemy. The enemy who have tricked you of your wife? I do not believe she would have honored this so-called law, Utad added, quickly. It was a concession, and Finan knew it. But still his friend turned a weary head to his friend. You don't know your sister. I suppose I was not the one cock-deep in Osrith all these years. Finan glanced away, and then back at Utad for a second too long, then said, if she has chosen that you I kneel swine, if she has chosen to do as Constantine decrees ... she will be here, facing us in this ... and ... I don't want to think that she would be opposite me on the battlefield. That's if she's even here. That's if she is not with Constantine, if she is not in her land, if she hasn't gone to Bibbenberg to pay siege to my fortress. Finan looked up to Utad again, his thoughts on the two Beric prisoners into whose care Aethelstan had allowed them to be placed. Ha! The exclamation made them stop. Both men turned to see Benedetta looking at them. Men, she added, and shook her head, bending it to her needlework. Utad was about to get to his feet, but Finan rose first and put a hand out in defense and strode to Benedetta. In a voice he had never heard Finan use before, Utad listened as his best friend said, if you know anything, Benedetta, of Osrith, won't you please tell me? Benedetta glanced to Utad and then back to Finan. She is here, in this city, she told him. She is with the bishop. The bishop, Finan repeated. All three of them knew what she meant. Then I thank you, he added, and pushed through the door of the quarters, and out into the rain-sodden street. Utad was a mere breath away and, as Finan turned, anticipating the look of shock and hurt that his friend would give him, said, I beg of you, don't do this. And he almost didn't. He almost did not cross the flagstones of Sister's courtyard towards the chapel. Almost didn't fling the guards away at hand to gain entry, as Utad shouted that Sihrik and Osferth were to be on guard. The bishop, Finan demanded to the first person who looked like they were vaguely in charge. He was a youth, long-limbed and gangly, his hair curling slightly on the top of a very skinny face. Where is he? And before Utad could stop him, and before even the hapless young deacon in training had a chance to answer, he had thrust him aside and was scanning the chapel, and the chantry, before heaving aside two priests in his way towards the vestry. You can't go in there, bellowed one of the clerics. My blade says he can, Utad retorted. And Finan did not wait to lift the latch but instead booted the thick oak door so hard it broke one of the hinges. You can't do that, the priest protested. I'll call the guards. But his words were a merriment, falling behind them as Finan and Utad strode on, pushing past priests and through doors until he got to Bishop Oswald's private quarters, ignoring all of the calls that they weren't to go through. Where is she? Bishop Oswald, kneeling in prayer beside his mounted cross on the wall, turned at the intrusion. The candles guttered, but he did not look as surprised as a man might be if he was about to be challenged over the location of a person, Utid thought. His eldest son glanced from Finan to Utid for a moment, before the mask went up again. Lord Utid, I am glad to see you. I trust Bibbenberg is well. After you gave me the information, indeed, Utid acknowledged, grudgingly. But Finan stepped towards Bishop Oswald, and then did something none of them expected. He dropped to his knees and gripped the bishop's cassock, as if saying a silent prayer through the medium of Tyrian purple linen clasped between his hands. Then he got to his feet. There's nowhere else she could be, Bishop Oswald. Finan's words were stilted, formal, and did nothing to hide his emotion, save preventing it from overspilling into anger. Then Finan rose slowly to his feet. I would have you, respectfully, tell me where she is. Finan, Bishop Oswald began, but the release of the word, please, from the lips of Utid's oldest friend came like a whip crack, and they were once again aboard the slaver who had taken them away from themselves, and I to a place where they were not human at all, but human like animals. Stay strong, Utid and Finan would say to one another when it looked like either of them was succumbing to despair, stay strong. And Utid sent those words to him, thoughts as sharp as shards of metal through the air between them. Please, he begged, for the love I bear your father, for the love I know you bear to him, and he to you, tell me where she is. And, when any of them thought about that moment thereafter, about who moved first, Utid, or his son, none of them could quite tell. It happened in mere seconds, Utid embracing his firstborn Bishop Oswald becoming Utridson again. After an indeterminate time, marked only by a candle near the cross becoming lower than it had been when they had entered, and then guttering out, they stood back from one another. Bishop Oswald turned to Finan, and said, it is true she was here, my aunt, he clarified, and I took her in, fed her, clothed her, treated her injuries, he added, looking across to Utid, who gave a brief nod of approval. Then he looked to Finan again. But she has not returned to me this day. She may still be in Seaster, Utid demanded to know. Perhaps ... Father. Bishop Oswald stumbled over the word that he was unused to saying. I can help you look but ... With the situation as it is, we will look, but tell me, did she wed the Uineal shit? Bishop Oswald glanced to his father at the curse, but did not admonish it. Instead he nodded to the distressed daughter his vestry. She did not, he told them. She was very, very clear on that point. Utid watched a sigh ripple through his friend as a banging came on the door behind them. Then, when you see her again, tell her I love her and for me the situation has not changed. There was a pause just then. Silence was not quite reached, for the candle which had burned nearly out was crackling in the last of the sheep fat. I will, Finan, Bishop Oswald told him, wishing now he could give the man the comforting words he craved. All I can say is that she made her way here, she is not in Alba. Finan looked as if he were about to say something and then had swallowed the words. When she comes back, I will ask her to stay, Bishop Oswald added. May I ask, would you wish me to marry you, under the law of the Roman Church? Ethelstan's law. If she wants it, Finan told him, by Christ, if she wants it. And then he was gone, reversing the process, egressing as he has accessed Bishop Oswald's private chambers, leaning heavily on the wooden palisade wall that lined the Bear of Seaster. The dim moonlight reflected off his friend's face. Utid could see perspiration across his brow, his frame racking as if fighting for breath. Utid, I love her, and I would have her, as my wife. His words felt heavy, as if Finan was having difficulty in speaking when Utid put his hand to his shoulder. Then, he put his hand to his blade and stood away from the wall. That was all he would say on the matter, as both Finan, unwilling king of the Ullaid, and Utid, lord of Bibbenberg, began to hunt for Osrith Lackland. She is not with the Gales and Cymric, Igil Skilligrimson told Utid, sitting beside Berg, who thrust a slab of meat in his hand. They had returned as dawn broke, and Utid had gone to interrogate his man, poet and spy, again, watching Benedetta's slight flame move up and down in her sleep. There is no sign of Constantine, Utid told Igil, questioning the man over his intelligence. This day is the appointed day, Here, in Seaster. Yes, Igil admitted. And they will come. They are in the east even now, more Danes, disaffected, land-hungry. And some from over the eastern sea. He leaned towards Utad, making as if to whisper, but ensuring that Finan heard his words. The alliance holds because of the dower marriage, Igil added, a grin on his face. Eh? And he mimicked a hip thrust. I told you she was loyal to her oaths, Finan told him sadly. I do not believe it, Utad told him. We know she is in Seaster. If the oath held, she would not be in Seaster, alone, seeking refuge with my son. He put a hand to his shoulder. She loves you. 20 years of seeing you both, I have never seen the like before. But a different expression crossed Finan's face now, as if something else was occurring to him. If I wed her, would you allow her to fight? Do you want me to allow her to fight? Finan's eyebrows raised scornfully. I do not, Finan told him, and dashed the point of his blade between two flagstones. Christ, I need to find her. 88,888,888. But Osrith had not promised to return to her nephew. She had not promised anything to him after she left for somewhere, and he had begun to pray. As she walked, the cold, milling night getting between her neck and the new jerkin that she had been given, she knew that she could never, now, return to Alba, never see the people who she loved so very deeply, had fought beside, had trusted herself to, and they to her. Alba was gone, her family, the warriors beside whom she had ever fought. Beric would be her aim now, but with the whole country up in terror, reaching there would be impossible, especially as it seemed as if the world was coming to Osrith. So, it was Seaster, or nothing, and she was certain she was not going to be kept safe by her nephew, put with the women with some guards. Osrith had new clothes, a sheep-wool padded jerkin for over-armor, and somehow Bishop Oswald had delivered both her seeks and sword to a blacksmith, who could hardly have been short of work, and had returned them to her as if they were new. Therefore, Osrith was on her way to the inns, for that would be where she would find her men, the men of whom she had spoken to the guards on the ramparts, Elfkin and his brother Oshir, Wulfir, Falkbald, Eglafrith. At least one of them must be alive, one of them must be here, in Mercia's defense. It didn't take as long as Osrith expected to find someone, in the end. Not in an inn, but standing early morning guard before the gate of the grain store, and stopped Osrith as she passed by. Boy, Miral called, hurrying over to her, torch flaring by her face. Who gave you that outfit? A West Saxon? He took Osrith by the shoulder. Boy, he called again, you are not to fight, do you hear me? Osrith turned, and was ready to fight the man who had stopped her. Bring out Buey, pristine, highly polished, a perfect weapon in her hand. Just as she was bringing it back in a loop with her arm, she saw the man who had been her friend for so many years. The Morrigan stood aside in Osrith's mind for just a second, and her battle cry was replaced by a choked sob when she saw the surly expression of the man, stretched as he must have been on a guard duty in the circumstances of impending battle and high demand for food, while a simple-headed youth waved a sword around as if he were about to join a blood month hunting party. Miral. His voice choked in Osrith's throat, and flung herself to his shoulder. Even his rough shaking could not detach her from his person, and it took Osrith to cry his name several times for Miral to hold her by her shoulders and look into her face. Wulfir, one of Osrith's former men, approached. Look! He exclaimed. His eyes went over Osrith's face again, as if he was making sure of what he saw. Take your captain to Elfkin. I will be with you. Osrith watched as her former commander strode away towards the guard room, while Wulfir stared down to Osrith. Captain, he breathed, almost amused that she was there in amongst the chaos and disorder. Captain, Elfkin is preparing us, preparing your men, he told her. So, yes, under the circumstances, you should come. And come she did, following the man who was once a stripling under her command across the courtyard and to the guardroom. Already pressed with men preparing one another to stand before the gates of Seaster, torches shone on polished mail, spearheads, sword hilts. Wulfir slid along the wall by the door and across to the others. away from the companies preparing themselves. They were all there, Osrith noticed, all of them, all of her company. It must have been 40, nearly 50 years before that she had commanded them. Elfkin, a young boy of 7, his brother Oshir 14, and desperate to prove himself along with their cousin Egelfrith, even Walfir and Falkbald, older warriors than she was then, now veterans of many battles, were standing there, and for a moment, Osrith froze, choked with the knowledge that Eswi, her dearest friend, who had been with her through so many things, was not standing with them. "I will fight with you," she declared to Elfkin, when she had been clapped on the back by them all, when she had asked of them all, when she had told him that his daughter, Elena, was safe and happy at Bibbenberg, because young Uhtred had been left behind to hold the fortress. This was greeted with heartfelt approval by them all, and Elfkin told her that when they had finished with this battle, he would ask leave of Aldhelm to travel to Bibbenberg and fetch her. "Many have been called here," Osrith told them, when he asked why she was in Seaster. "I came here, because there was nowhere else left for me," and she told them about Alba, and the force that had been contrived, leaving out the crucial part, that the Northern Alliance's aim was, in effect, genocide. "I have nowhere else to go, nowhere else to be. I have fled Alba over an impossible situation. My last oath was to Mercia." Elfkin's face fell, and he looked at Osrith with a seriousness she had not seen since he was a young boy, determined to fight, determined to hold an edged weapon, tagged Sikhs, in fact, when he defended a farmstead from marauding Danes. "Elfkin, I am here, and I will fight, so I might as well be with my company." It was then that Elfkin put a hand to her shoulder, and stooped to her level, and took her hands in his. "No, Osrith," he told her softly. "For the love of all who knew you, know you still, all wish, and would wish you to be anywhere but here." He looked to the door, at another company walking through it to stand in front of the western gate. "These are not men, they are butchers, sending men back to us like the poor wretches you saw, half gutted, half scalped. These are not Christian men who do this." "No," Osrith admitted, "no, they are not Christians. They believe they have as much right to attack Mercia and Wessex, as England has to defend its lands," she told him. But it was the look on the young man's face that told Osrith the truth. The pain of the years on battlefields, in sieges, in guerrilla attacks came back to her then, and she knew she was lost. Elfkin, all of her men, wanted to do this without her, wanted to face the gut-spilling, pride-extinguishing, terror-inducing enemy alone. They did not want to see her face when they died, spitting blood and screaming in shameful fear. They did not want her to see the cowardly acts that they might commit in the redness of battle to save themselves, or not save their comrades because bravery had failed them. "And yet I am of Mercia, Elfkin, as much as you, as any of you," she told them all. "Osrith," Elfkin replied, glancing at her company, the yellow of the torch flame highlighting a face battle-worn but determined. "Go to Berwick, go home, or stay until it is safe." "Let us do this for you," he added. "You should have your men fight for you for once. You have done enough, Captain." Osrith looked at them all of the men whom she had commanded over the years. They had never once let her down, never once betrayed her, and she them. How could she leave them to fight alone at Mercia's calling when they had always fought there? "You would," Osrith began, as the doors opened and a commander ushered another company through to the courtyard, still not yet broken with any kind of morning light. Then she stopped, as a hand reached out to hers. All of her company watched as, he hit her, a hand took hers and she was pulled from them and through the armory door into another used for storing leatherware. They would fight without her, then, for she saw whose hand had pulled her away. "Miral!" she exclaimed, and then fell silent. Aldhelm was before her. Osrith looked back to Miral. "Walfir brought me to Elfkin. I would fight for Mercia." But Miral said nothing, only looked to his lord, who trod towards Osrith in the shadows. "Of course you would, of course," Aldhelm told her. "You have shown nothing but courage, fearless determination for our land. You are a Mercian in your heart, Osrith, not even Northumbria has ever gained the devotion you have shown to the kingdom. Osrith kept her eyes on Aldhelm. The man, at least Tuted's age, and devoted to Mercia, looked little different from when he officially counselled Death Leard, when he stood for and spoke for the good of Mercia, even when it had been subsumed by Wessex, when Elfwin had been removed from Tamworth and the lords had come round to Edward's way of thinking, that thinking being that he, Edward of Wessex, was about to annex Mercia and begin an empire last seen in the days of Rome. "You are the brightest of Mercia," Aldhelm told her, his face firm, calm, ready to command company after company before the gates of Cester. Men may not necessarily have liked him, but they respected him absolutely. "That you have come to us means we will fight the stronger. I cannot tell you not to fight, but I will not have a mercenary warrior fall when she need not." And then Aldhelm broke from his stoicism, dropping his eloquent words like a man waking up from a dream, and before Osrith even knew what he was doing he seized Osrith's arms, and kissed her softly, his hands on her forearms, looked her eyes his own, deep brown, like new, ripened hazelnuts in this breath of early autumn glimmered at her. His lips were soft, and the gesture lasted mere seconds. "Should we not come back," he told her, "remember us, Osrith, captain of Mercia." So, she would go to Berwick, when danger had passed. That was her decision. She would wait for the battle to end, leave Mercia, pass into Northumbria, be prepared to do some sort of deal with Domhnall in order to regain Berwick. As she watched the door swing back on its hinges, as she watched two men whose good opinion she respected, Osrith felt her heart cloud over, like the sun on a summer's day slowly obliterated by rain clouds. But why did it feel wrong? The question was in Osrith's mind as she snuck out over the courtyard stones and towards the chapel where yet still more dead and dying people were being brought for hospitality. Because it was not the right decision. She wanted Finan, she wanted what she had in Berwick, but most of all she wanted Uhtred, his approval, his respect. 88,888,888. "You are the men who are most loyal to my sister," Uhtred said. He glanced at Idjal, who knew the Pictish that both Bean and Caltigar spoke. They spoke English too, they knew that he knew that. But the sight of Idjal he had considered would be the most effective. It was he who Uhtred had intended to be the overseer of Berwick just before their lord, the man who had married Osrith, before Uhtred had killed him at the siege of Bibbenberg, and he assumed that there might be some residual loyalty towards his man. "Where is she? Why are you here?" But he was wrong. No mattered the question, neither would give a straightforward answer. "We were captured, brought ahead of King Constantine's men," Bean told Uhtred after Idjal had asked him a third time. "There is a new lord, a lord whose rule we do not acknowledge," Caltigar added, "a lord who we had never seen until the week before Samain, a lord who compelled us to act and whose men took the guard from Berwick and conscripted us for the king." Uhtred gave Caltigar a doubtful look. "There is but one king here, and he is called Aethelstan. We know this. His men are at Bibbenberg," Bean told Uhtred. "As of the lady, we know not," he added. "It is this same question we would put to you." "Constantine truly comes?" asked Uhtred. "He does," Caltigar told him. "Then, where is my sister?" "We know not. We know from the new lord, her husband, that she fled Caeliquilid." "Then she will be here," Uhtred said, mostly to himself. Idjal put a stiff hand to Uhtred's shoulder. "Are these the bastard Picts upon whose lands you tried to impose me?" Idjal Skilligrimson's words were no question, but a mocking dialogue. Yet both he and Uhtred turned suddenly as Caltigar spoke. He had understood Idjal's Danish question and in Danish he replied, "But your land is of Bernicia, Northumbria, who fight on King Ethan's side. Our land, Lady Osrith's land, is Pictish. We would have her returned to us." Then Finan stepped forward, and Caltigar gave his former lord a look of surprise, and then surprised Uhtred even more when the man, so deliberately provocative to himself, nodded at the neck respectfully to Finan. "If you know where she is," he said to both Caltigar and Bean, "I would have you tell me, for I would dearly like her to return to our lands, and particularly in your company, lord." Caltigar exclaimed, "We were told you had abandoned her." Constantine's interpretation of the law, Finan told them, standing so stiff and formal beside Utid that he thought his friend was going to burst, and added in Pictish so that neither Utid nor Igil could understand, "So tell me, do you fight for the King of Alba or the King of England?" "We fight for whoever the Lady Osrith fights," Chlortogar told him, then turned to Utid and continued in English. "Yes, we raided south, and northerners raided Berwick, thus has it always been so." Utid nodded, putting a hand out when Igil, usually grumpy at the best of times with the condition that he seemed to have that made it difficult for him to more sometimes, launched himself at Sister's prison bars at Chlortogar's answer, grabbing the bars and screaming at them. At Utid's touch on his shoulder, he backed down and looked to his master. "You are my prisoners now, the king has decreed it, and you shall go free. When my sister is found, when she is, you are going to guard her and take her back to Berwick. Do I make myself understood?" "You do," Chlortogar told him, and repeated everything back to Bean, for the effect. Bean already understood everything that Utid said. The gates clicked open, and the torch on the wall crackled as a draught of air moved through the dungeon. "You will wait with you will wait in the quarters of the bishop," Utid told them. "We will escort you, when we have searched the city again." "We have already searched the city, my spies are still searching," Igil told Utid. "If she was here, with your son," and at this Finan saw his lord's face flinch, "she may be gone." "No," Finan interjected. "She came here for a reason. There is a purpose for her being in Seaster." "As a spy," Igil pointed out, then turned to Utid. "There is only one reason a bastard Gale, who has close connections to you, would enter the city of the enemy. We questioned the guards, they said she claimed to be a Gale. She is here to betray Aethelstan, of course." But the words were punched out of him, and Igil Skilligrimson skidded across the courtyard. Finan left looking at his knuckles, such was the force he had needed to hit the man. "Don't look like that, Irishman, you would know I speak the truth." "And now look," Igil added, as he scrambled backwards, "I speak the truth. Only it would seem your son is involved, Lord Utid." "Why do you keep him alive?" Finan asked Utid, bending towards the Danishman and reading his fist again. But he saw that Utid was looking towards the door of the chapel that led to the bishop's quarters. Even in the dark, pre-dawn, no one could mistake that it was Bishop Oswald opening the door and a woman was stepping through. He got the first, before even Utid or the two Berwick men. "Osrith, Liu Amo Cha tilde Diarus Cecile." There were no other words, then. Osrith, who had heard her name, looked up as Finan ran to her and she ran to him, then, and threw her arms around him as he did the same. He bent to kiss her as she stood up on tiptoe to kiss him. "Osrith." Finan's voice was low, comforting, like he used to be when she was feeling vulnerable about something, and he would allow her to push herself close to his chest when they lay in bed together, which then, sooner or later, led to kisses, and caresses, and touching, which led to hands on her tits, Finan squeezing them, her nipples hardening under his strong, muscular hands, which would wet her cunt, which would rouse his cock, which she would envelop with a hand of her own, then work her way down, her mouth covering it, licking the underside of it, as Finan began to lose himself to the pleasure that her mouth was giving to him, the back of her throat closing around his foreskin, his pre-cum filling her throat as he gave in to his pleasure. Osrith felt whole when it was the two of them together. Secure when he would turn her over and hold her to him as he would finger her folds, his hot breath to her shoulder as he pushed inside gently but insistently, curling his fingers up inside her cunt. That would sometimes be enough cause the flow of nerve-tingling release around her hips, quicker, sometimes than tonguing, or rubbing her clit, or Osrith riding him. Finan was close. Very close to making her cry again, an emotion Osrith had experienced already, the evening before, when all hope was gone, one she decided she hated, for she now realized that she could not even remember the last time they had humped, been together, just themselves with the world far away from them. Oh, to take him away, to somewhere, just the two of them. It was Finan who let go first, and stood back from her, but Osrith was not finished, and said to Finan in Gaelish, "Finan begins with Constantine. He will fight this day." "That is good, it is a good thing," Finan replied, his face breaking into a smile, one that he used when he was trying to reassure her, and Osrith felt it working. He is somewhere safe. Osrith knew what he meant. There had always been questions over his parentage. Would that a sword came his way standing in the Wessex Mercia faction, on Aethelstan's side, it would eliminate another potential claimant for the throne of England. Whereas, Osrith knew, deep down, that Constantine believed him to be his own son, second son now next to Selarch, and would treat him as such, as would all of the Gales, Strathclydians and Picts who had stood beside him all his life. I felt I could not refuse Domhnall, Osrith said, and looked past Finan as Utad said, that bare-assed bastard. Of course you could not, Finan told her, and kissed her again. You are of Constantine. If I am, it is because I have lived most of my life in Alba. It has been my home for a long time. Then Berwick became my home. And Domhnall is being given that land, Utad, with not a little measure of a loaded statement, reiterated. Osrith did not know how he could guess that, but it was not the first time that Utad had surprised her about what he knew. Finan kissed her again, and all thoughts of Constantine and Domhnall went from her head. "Ha Thursday Duin Agam," she told him. "You can marry." Utad told her. "No, she cannot," Finan said. But Utad took a step to them both. "This Brehon law ... I have never heard of it. It is not Aethelstan's law, and we are in a land where Aethelstan's law applies." "I am not married here," Osrith admitted, looking back to Finan. Utad put a hand to her shoulder.